Hello, everyone, and welcome to Mankato. I'm Angela Davis from NPR News, and right now I am at the Mayo Clinic Health System Event Center with about 100 people who are excited about Minnesota history. Hey! We are excited about history. Now, we did prime the pump a little bit there because we are at the Minnesota Alliance of Local History Museums annual conference. So there are a lot of historians in this room. I appreciate the work that you do. We're here because we want to talk about what has happened over the past 12 months. Last March, President Trump issued an executive order titled Restoring Truth and Sanity to American History. Now, it mandated a shift in how American history is portrayed in federal institutions with a goal of eliminating, quote, improper, divisive, or anti-American ideology. Instead, according to the executive order, the focus should be on a more patriotic narrative. And to ensure that happens, funding was cut for anything that, quote, degrades shared American values or divides Americans by race. This order applied largely to federal institutions like the Smithsonian Museums and the National Park Systems. But here in Minnesota, the funding restrictions and shifts in ideology were felt immediately. At this conference last year, the people who collect and keep Minnesota history were alarmed by what might be coming their way. So what happened? Were their fears realized? That's what we're going to talk about. I have 3 museum directors with me and 1 college professor to talk about all of this, and let me introduce them to you now. First, we have Jessica Potter. Jessica is the executive director of the Blue Earth County Historical Society. So we are here on her home turf in Mankato. We're glad to have you here. Jessica, during a busy week as you are hosting this. Next, we have another executive director from a county historical society, Dave Nichols. Dave directs the Rice County Historical Society. And if you're trying to remember, where is Rice County? It is home to both Northfield and Faribault. Welcome, Dave.
Hi.
We also have with us Mai Vang Husel, who founded and directs the Hmong Museum, which is located in St. Paul. Thanks for making the drive, Mai. And next to Mai, we have Professor Kyle Ward, who directs the Social Studies Education Program at Minnesota State University, Mankato. He's also a scholar in the field of historiography. Say it for me.
Historiography.
Historiography. Thank you, Kyle, which looks at how history is recorded and told. And so glad to have you with us, Professor.
Thank you.
So, Jessica, let's start with what you have experienced the last 12 months. And it's been a very busy year. How has Blue Earth County Historical Society seen funding cuts? Have you seen funding cuts? And if so, describe in what ways?
Yeah, so last year, about the same time, we would have had our annual meeting. Well, most of the county historical societies have their own annual meetings. And I remember people at the meeting asking me, well, what's happening with the government orders that are coming down, the executive orders that are coming down. And I would say, well, it's not affecting us yet. But I said, watch local government aid that comes from the state of Minnesota, so federal to state. That starts to get down to the counties. Once that's interrupted, then the counties that we do the work for will start to see that trickle down. And sure enough, by the end of 2025, we received notice from our county. Most of us are independent nonprofit organizations, so we're not a county agency, but we receive some kind of allocation from the county. State statute allows for that. And so the Blue Earth County Historical Society, in addition to all of the nonprofits in this particular community, received notice from Blue Earth County that there was going to be a 10% cut across the board because at the county level, they had already done all of the cutting they could. The library lost 6 employees. The Health and Human Services was already shrinking down. They were looking for early retirements, anything to trim the budget at the county level. So then our county allocation was cut by 10% for 2026. For us, that was about $12,000. And so that's that point where it wasn't, we weren't feeling it right away because the IMLS grants, we don't receive any of those, or the National Endowment of Humanities. Those any organizations that were tied with those particular grants probably felt it a lot sooner. For us, it was a matter of watching and waiting and knowing that it was going to come. And many of us, I'm speaking on behalf of David, which I haven't asked him if I can do that, but I'm going to do it anyway.
He's smiling.
Used to it. It's fun.
So most of us have also been told that from county perspective, that 2027 will be even more cuts.
So what does this mean? What types of changes do you then have to make if you're working with a smaller budget?
Yeah. So last year, we went into the annual meeting. Ours was in March. We went into our March annual meeting, and we actually had a staff person who resigned because she got a different position. I really anticipated, even at that point, there was no way that we were going to be able to refill that position. And it was, to start out, it was to conserve resources, but as the time kept passing and we've got the notice from the county, it was spot on. We would have had to lay off a person or fire a person, dismiss a person based on our budget. So for us, it was an unfilled position, full-time position with the organization that will remain unfilled for an undetermined amount of time. It will be a long time till we add another staff person.
So then how do you fill the gap in terms of the work that person was doing? What happens as a result of that?
Yeah, so we lucked out because we have close to 100 people who volunteer with us. Mm-hmm. And so we tried something. Some of my staff didn't think it would work, but I'm like, I believe in our volunteers. And we asked them to help us staff the research center. And so we gave them the opportunity to pick shifts, to be the person in the room that was helping researchers do family history research or house history or whatever they were looking for, because many of them were genealogists already, so they're already familiar with the research, the resources, and how to do research. And sure enough, we are a year in, and we have volunteers that are covering shifts in the research center so that space can be open, and our existing force staff still have the ability to do the work that they've been doing.
So volunteers are filling the gap. And in terms of money, have you seen private donors or corporations be able to fill that financial gap?
Not yet. I've also seen, I think there's an interesting thing that's happening in our world in that, well, everything's going up. Prices of everything have gone up. Gas prices, food prices, everything has gone up, or even utilities. Mm-hmm. And so we've seen a little bit more of a decline because I think I kind of saw it during COVID, that people are just kind of like pull in and conserve a little bit more than normal, just because they don't know what's going to come next. And that's really what we saw in 2025. The other thing that, so I think I might have also pulled in a little bit and thought, oh gosh, we just gotta pull in. It's COVID all over again. And then somebody said, well, if you don't tell them you're bleeding, they won't give you a Band-Aid. And so we told our supporters that we're bleeding, that we didn't fill this position, and that we have a funding gap, and we anticipate it to get worse. And they showed up, and they filled that funding gap. So when we ended 2025, we ended balanced. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's a matter of not being afraid to say, you know what, we matter. The work we do does matter. And if you can support us, that would be fantastic.
Well, I think what I'm hearing is that people recognize there's a value to what a historical society can bring and offer. There's a need.
Yes.
So do you feel people do value what you all are able to contribute.
Yeah, I would agree with that completely, and I think that's across the board. There's definitely supporters for all of our organizations.
And in terms of timing, I have in my notes, it's the 125th anniversary this year here at the Blue Earth County Historical Society. So there's probably somewhere in the budget you're planning a celebration.
We are, and it's going to be right here. And it's going to be right here on November 7th, which is our anniversary day. And so if you come back, everybody can come to the party. And
But
help
that
us
parties
celebrate.
cost money.
Parties cost money. We'll have business sponsors, corporate sponsors that cover all of the expenses. So that it is a fundraising event for the. So if you come, you have to spend money. That's part.
Please.
That's part of the deal. But yeah, no, it will be completely funded by corporate sponsors, and then ticket prices and things like that.
Dave, I imagine there are a lot of overlaps between Jessica's story and what you're experiencing over in Rice County. So what kind of impact have you seen to your funding and operations in the past year?
Yeah, we had it a little slightly different. We were very fortunate that we did not get a cut in 2025. But we also didn't get an increase, which in some ways is just as bad. Because to Jessica's point, everything keeps going up, right?
Right.
So our expenses, our staff expenses, our utilities, the cost of doing our programming, our school tours continue to get exponentially more expensive. And if our incomes aren't continuing to grow along with that, we start running into these deficits. On our end, where we actually saw the most cuts were our membership started declining, which kind of has a knock-on effect that I think a lot of people don't think about is, so there's the sort of regular donations that we get, somebody puts $5 in the jar, thank you for that. Please always give $5 if you can. But when we do our large fundraising asks, a lot of times it's to our members. So the less people we have to ask, the less money there is to come in. And so it's sort of this vicious cycle of as your membership goes down, you get less donations. And if the other sources of funding that you're relying on aren't there to pick up the slack, you're just constantly backsliding.
Mm-hmm. I work in public media. I understand.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So that was the hard part for us. We were very fortunate that we have a pretty healthy endowment that we've been able to lean on. But last year was the first year that we pulled more than we've earned, if that makes sense. It kind of gains a certain amount every year. And so now we're in this position of, well, how long can we keep playing that game before we need to really start revisiting a lot of the programs that we have? This also came at a time when our organization was finally starting to pick up steam and starting to start a whole bunch of new programs. And then we went, where'd the money go? And so that has become a thing too.
Give me an idea of the types of programs you're talking about. Like, what are you offering?
Yeah, so my organization, last year we started a week-long living history festival. So we take over a park, we have demonstrators, reenactors that come out. Those people like to make money too, so we got to pay all of them. We do, we've been trying to do a lot of reenactment, we have downtown walking tours, things like that. Even just our regular school tours has a lot of hands-on components that need to be replenished and need to be
For those of us where it's been a long time since we've been in school, maybe elementary school, high school, how do you describe the value of having opportunity to visit a museum or a historical society event?
I can't, I'm biased. I can't talk it up enough. For me, I think kids are getting sort of their general history in school, but there's something much more valuable to your local history. To be able to walk into this building and maybe you see a picture of your grandpa or a friend's family member, or just to see, this is everything that happened where I am.
Your local history.
Your local history, and that connection to those broader things you're learning about, right? If you're a kid learning about World War II, to be able to come in and see the uniform of a soldier who actually grew up down the block from you, and now you have a deeper connection to that. I don't think there is a dollar amount you can attach to that value.
Well,
Would agree.
I would say it's more than $5, though, probably.
A little, yeah.
So how are you then reshaping to meet the current circumstances? Are you finding some new ways to fund yourselves? Have you had to reduce some hours, cut some staff?
So fortunately, we haven't been quite that bad off yet. We are having to relook at some of our programs. We did cut 1 or 2 programs for this year that we had typically done, partly because even though there was a value to the community, it was just financially too difficult for us to maintain them. And the unfortunate part is that we aren't sort of seeing. I'm very grateful that for Blue Earth County, they've had their community sort of step up and help fill some of that gap. We have not been that fortunate.
Meaning volunteers?
We have a ton of volunteers, but sort of the financial backing to allow us to continue some of those programs.
What did you cut?
So we have a couple of sort of community open houses. So we bring in a whole bunch of different organizations from across the county. We sort of take over the fairgrounds, which is where our museum is at, and let everybody come in. So we do charge for those tables, but it just wasn't really covering its cost. It was becoming more expensive on our end to put it on than it was for the money that was coming in. And as an example, I mean, you can find our numbers online. In 2025, we had about a $2,000 deficit. For this year, we had about a $9,000 deficit, and we didn't add anything. None of our staff got increases. None of our, a lot of our programs stayed the same. So that's kind of an idea of where I say, none of our income went up, but our expenses kept going up. And so that deficit keeps getting larger, and we're struggling to find ways to fill that gap.
And Jessica, I'll go back to you. Does it feel like you're just sort of operating day to day with sort of a dark cloud over your head?
There are days. Yeah, there are days. But then there's bright lights, and there's sun that shines through that. The rays of sun are people that I know believe in our organization and through. And there are, yes. But this has been my job for 25 years, and there's always been cloudy days, and there's always been bright sunny days. It's why we keep doing this for a job. It's hard to say it that way, but it is. I know there were times when I would take my budget to our facility our finance committee, and they'd like, well, this is what I hope to do this year, and they'd look at me like, no, you have to have a plan. They're CPAs, and I'm like, yeah, well, we just don't know what the year's going to hold, but based on what our budget was last year and what our expenses were, this is what I anticipate was going to happen this year, but. Who knows? None of us know what honestly is going to. Our world is a little bit on fire, so we never know what's going to happen.
I think that's the hardest part for most of us nonprofits is that, if you look at a business, they kind of have an idea of like, these are the incomes we're going to have and the expenses. Because we're nonprofits, so much of, our expenses we can account for, but our incomes are reliant on the goodwill and the public trust we have in our communities. And as that's attacked by forces outside of ourselves, there aren't many ways for us to compensate for that.
And I think there's a little bit of pause in thinking, what is the summer season going to be with gas prices, what they are.
Because normally summer is very busy.
Yes. For us, we have 2 sites. We have our museum, the History Center, and we also have the historic R.D. Hubbard House. So we have 2 facilities, and it's summer. And that's most people are traveling in the summer. They go to a new town. They go check out the museums. And so with gas prices, people may not be traveling, or they may not have that discretionary income to be able to pay admission to go to a museum. So they have to make some of those choices. And I think I was talking to some of my colleagues today, and I think there's some real fear of, well, what is the summer going to hold for us? Which is why when we create our budgets, it's a little bit with a hope and a prayer, but we do the best that we possibly can. So visit your local museums.
I want to talk with you. Unlike Jessica and Dave, you do not had a museum tied to a county. The Hmong Museum in St. Paul is based out of the Hmong village there in St. Paul. What is happening to your funding? What have you seen in the last 12 months?
Yeah, so we're in a somewhat of a unique position in that this last year was the 50th anniversary of the Hmong people arriving to Minnesota. And so there's been a little bit of a push with grants and funding for those kinds of programs. And so we've been able to get some state funding and grants to help with some of those kind of programs. But what we have seen, very similar to the two county museums, is that our individual donations have really dwindled and gone down and hasn't gone back up again.
And why do you think that has happened?
I think that it has to do with people prioritizing other sorts of philanthropy. So more things like housing or food security, those sorts of things. And so they're not thinking to give to museums because it's not like an immediate need. So I think that's one of those things. But I think it's also the rising expenses in everybody's pockets. And so people are just really holding on to their money. They're not donating the way that they have.
Right. So I have in my notes that over the year of 2025 that things were starting to get sort of closer to full strength last year when the ICE surge happened, when we had the increase in the number of federal immigration enforcement officers. A lot of people chose to stay home. How did the ICE surge in January impact the Hmong Museum in St. Paul?
Yeah, so we had to close our doors in January and parts of February just to keep our staff safe, to keep our community safe. We're located in Hmong Village, and so when Metro Surge began, people were seeing ICE in the parking lots, and we just knew right away that the community wasn't going to come back and shop, and they weren't going to come to our museum, and we didn't want to put anyone at any additional risk that we didn't need to. And so that pretty much paused all of our programs. We had a fundraiser planned for February that obviously didn't happen. Our program, our story mapping project that we were working on, we were trying to get people to share stories with us. I mean, we obviously didn't share that on social media because everything was around the Metro Surge, and it just wasn't the right message to send to the community that it was a normal time. And so a lot of our programs paused.
So you took a big financial hit.
Yeah, I mean, for us, everything is kind of delayed. So when an incident like that happens, like the pandemic, it takes us a long time to ramp back up again. So the pandemic happened. It took us a while to kind of get our programs back up and running, our funding back up. And then with the Metro Surge, I mean, it began in November, December. And so people were just, again, holding onto their funds. Philanthropy is, focused on other areas. And now we're just starting to ramp back up again. And so when you stop the momentum, it's hard to get it picked up again.
I want to make sure we talk about Minnesota's legacy grant. The Hmong Museum, a lot of the funding comes through the grants. For folks who are not that familiar with the value of Minnesota's Legacy Fund, could you talk a little bit about just the importance of having that here in our state?
Yeah, Minnesota is such a great state that the people of Minnesota have decided to put some of this dollars that they, in our taxes towards arts programming, towards water, towards, culture. And, with that, it's been able to fund a lot of our programs that we would not be able to do otherwise.
And Mike, tell us, who is coming to the Hmong Museum and what are they experiencing when they get there?
We get lots of students. They come by in field trips. We get a lot of visitors who come to Hmong Village and, just happen upon us. We get visitors from out of town, so families would bring their families from out of town to come and visit us. And we also go out into the community as well. So we visit corporate, groups if they want to learn more about our community or do one of our workshops. And so we've got a wide range of audience members.
And how do you describe the value of having that museum there in the metro area where people can learn, in great detail about the history of Hmong people and, sort of put things in historical context when they look at what we see today?
I've done speaking engagements to groups in the community who know about the Hmong community, but really have not taken the time to learn about it. And so there are people who are completely new to the Hmong experience. And then we've got young Hmong children who are coming to our museum and seeing, people who look like them, seeing the stories that they're familiar with. And, I'm just kind of seeing how proud they are to see Hmong clothing that they're experiencing at Hmong Village, and so it's that value. It does not have a number, right? It's just that kind of internal feeling of feeling welcomed, of learning something new. So it's invaluable.
And for people who are not Hmong, it's a way for us to learn about our neighbors.
Correct. Yeah.
Well, as if funding cuts weren't enough, part of what alarmed many historians about the executive order last year was the ideology, the goal of making history more patriotic and less divisive. I want you to listen to me read how the Organization of American Historians responded to the president's executive order last spring. I'm reading a quote here. This directive seeks to limit the ways in which history is taught to the public and understood, especially by discouraging the incorporation of perspectives that might challenge simplified, one-dimensional, and biased views of American history. It proposes to rewrite history to reflect a glorified narrative that downplays or disappears elements of American history, slavery, segregation, discrimination, division, while suppressing the voices of historically excluded groups. End quote. Strong words. Professor Ward, I want to bring you in here. Let's have you kick off this part of our conversation. How do you respond to charges that the way we teach history today is in some way not patriotic enough?
I would say that people who wrote that probably haven't been in the schools lately. Major changes. The history classroom that we have today aren't the history classrooms of the 1950s. Things have changed. The student population has changed. The way we teach it has changed. So to say that it's not patriotic misses the point. The goal is more to get students to think about the past, and consider interpretation, perspective, and bias of some of these events that go through it. Know that history has to be seen through certain lenses all the time too. So that's the purpose now.
If someone gets some one-on-one time with you, do you get this question? What is the point of history? Should we be focused on right now, Professor?
That's a daily question that happens.
Why do we have to keep talking about this stuff, Professor?
So as somebody who teaches future history teachers, my social studies methods classes, the thing I point out to them all the time is that the purpose of history is to take our culture and our civics and transmit it on to the next generation. So one generation says, this is what made our country great, this is all the wonderful things about it. Some of these aren't positive, some of them are negative as well. We're going to pass those on from one generation to the next. And we're going to try to make better citizens by doing that. I remarked, and I added a chapter in a book at one point in time, and it was the title of it was Warts and All, because I had an opportunity where I listened to a progressive, a very liberal individual talk, and they said, well, the problem with school education today is that we don't do warts and all. We don't teach everything that's out there. We got to teach the good and the bad. And then the reason I added it into the book is because about 2 or 3 days later, I heard a very conservative individual talking, and the problem with schools and education and history today is we don't teach history through warts and all. And they wanted the good and the bad. So we all agree on that, but the problem is, same thing about being citizens, is, okay, I ask my students, what is a good citizen? Or what are those warts? What are the bad things and what are the good things? So that's where it gets tricky as to what you emphasize as the most important things.
In the circles that you move in, would you say that most historians would say their job is to provide an honest, evidence-based accounting and not to promote a patriotic narrative?
Yeah, and I think I see the people, the museums who are nodding their head as well. Yeah, I think the idea now, so much so when we're working with future teachers who are going to teach history, is to get their students to dive into those primary sources, think about these different perspectives, think about the interpretations of all these things here. Not just a litany of here's names, places, and facts and stuff like that. Get away from that 1950s Disney version of history.
I think about today, like who is documenting what is happening right now? I mean, we're living. It feels like we're living at a historic time, a pivotal point right now in America when it comes to how history is told. I mean, does it feel like that to you as well? I mean, you've been in this line of work for a long time. What are your thoughts about like this moment right now and how we're thinking about history, talking about history, and documenting what is happening right now?
We've had history wars from the beginning. This is nothing new. But what's different now is the internet. And the internet is able to take the random person who's complaining about something and they find a home with other people that are out there. So they get to amplify their voices by using the internet. Everybody's saving history. And nobody in 1776 sat down and said, boy, we're living in history right now. This is really cool. It was a modern moment. So hopefully museums, people will keep all these archives and keep this data. I do worry with the internet now, how much we're actually able to save as compared to having the artifacts like letters and diaries and journals and stuff like that.
Oh, wow. Something new for me to worry about.
You're welcome.
What is preserving history today? Oh, like how will this moment in time be preserved? Do you think about that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. All the time.
All right. Back to my notes here. One of your specialties is the word I'm learning how to pronounce well, historiography, which is essentially the study of how history is collected and told. So how do people who specialize in this, historiographers, think of how what is happening in our country right now?
So with historiography, what you're looking at is not just the event that took place, but the interpretations, the biases, the perspectives that go along with that. So you keep going back to that focus. And so with the historiography aspect, you would want people to look at what's happening today and ask the question, why? Why are certain groups saying the things they are? Why did the Trump administration pass this legislation or this executive order?
Many of the museums across the country, when you tour them, you see old newspaper clippings or old, on film, old network newscasts. What about now? I mean, depending on what news publication you're reading or what broadcast outlet you're looking at, you get 2 or 3 or 5 different interpretations of an event. I'm puzzled about what the future holds.
So in the social studies methods classes, what we're pushing for now is media literacy. And we want students now to understand, okay, you read this document, why was it written? Who wrote it? For what purpose? And then how do we understand it today? What's the impact that this has today? So yeah, we're not looking at just reading it and going, okay, this is a nice document, but what were the different viewpoints and perspectives that come from that?
We know that the lenses that we use to interpret history are important, and those biases affect our interpretations. So what lens do you think historians have today?
We're in what they usually refer to like a postmodern era. But the lenses that we have to consider today are, again, I think the internet and technology has a big impact. over time, certain things, bills have been passed, laws have been passed, events have happened and changed our view of history. But with the internet, it just kind of throws everything up in the air. Again, my concern of how much are we losing through emails and anything else that's put online that we're just not protecting at this point in time.
So back to our museum directors, given what Professor Ward and I have been talking about, I'm wondering if any of you have felt any pressure to take down exhibits or maybe not publicize sensitive events or projects, especially in the last 12 months. Have you made any changes because of concerns about the environment we're in right now, or what you feel might be how your visitors would interpret something?
We haven't. I don't know if if David has or not, but we haven't. In fact, we stay the course. We stay true to who we are as an organization, who we've been for 125 years, and I think that's the advantage of being a historian. You have an understanding, you have a lens to be able to look back and see, okay, this was a moment in time, and we're in a moment in time, and so this will pass. This will potentially change things, but it's not going to change us, who we are as an organization. And our value is to collect, preserve, and share the history of our county, and we're going to continue to do that. And if somebody doesn't like it, then they won't come back, and that would be sad. But Mankato has a tough story to tell. It's a really heavy part of Minnesota and the United States history that happened here, and we're not going to shy away from telling that story because it's important to tell. And so if somebody walked in and said, well, I don't think you should talk about what happened in 1862, well, that's not who we are. So we're going to talk about it.
We're going to talk about that in more detail. We are going to get into the history of Mankato, but I do want to check in with Dave and Maya about this. Have you felt the need or any pressure to make any changes to what you're presenting or how you speak about things?
My board probably doesn't want me to answer the question like this, but I'm going to. Yes, though, because I am a stubborn sort, my decision has been to, instead of pulling back, to push forward. I think that sometimes you can take times like these to go, we should really reel that back and try to stick with what everybody wants, or use the opportunity to go, well, if they're expecting change anyway, then to try and incorporate more people. Faribault, which is where I'm at, we have the second largest Somali community in the state, and yet our museum in the past has not really included them as much. And so we've taken the opportunity to go, well, now is the best time to amplify those voices and make sure that they're seen. And that's had pushback, absolutely. But kind of to Jessica's point, if you don't want to see it, you don't have to come, but we want all of our community represented, all of our stories represented, regardless of who they are.
But it's fact. They're here.
Exactly.
Or they were here.
One of the things that one of the things I always say is the fun thing about the truth is it's what it is. You don't really get to argue it. You can try, but these people are here. This is their home as much as ours, and it's only fair that they get to be a part of it.
And my any pressure or discussions to make some changes, maybe pull back or maybe push forward more with some exhibits or how you talk about yourself, promote yourself, the Hmong Museum?
Yeah, our board has been very, very supportive. with us staying the course, right? Like sharing Hmong American experiences and stories, and really not trying to shy away from that, and using changing our language, that sort of thing. And so we've been very fortunate in that way. But I have been part of more national programs where we have been told to not use certain language, or to publicize the program in a different way that wouldn't call too much attention to the program, because they didn't want that kind of spotlight from the current administration. And
Certain
so,
keywords.
Certain keywords. Yep, exactly. Even though the program was, exactly about, the 50th year of Southeast Asians coming to this country, which could be, controversial for this administration. And so we were told that at the more national level, but locally we've been just have lots of support from our board and from the community.
And now it's time. Thank you. I love a live audience. It feels appropriate to have a history lesson here. You mentioned 1862. So for our listeners, I want to talk about the complicated nature of history in Mankato, because this city itself has grappled with a messy history. I want to start with you, Professor Ward, and Jessica. I would love for you to add to it as well. Educate us all on the mass execution that happened here in 1862 in Mankato. And then I also want to talk about the Abraham Lincoln exhibit. So can you, in sort of a concise way, get us all up to speed and what people should know about 1862 in Mankato?
I was going to ask you, how many hours do we have?
How about 2 minutes?
Okay, 2 minutes.
Give me
Okay,
that version.
We can do this. So yeah, 1862 is a pivotal moment in the history of Mankato, Minnesota, and the nation. American Civil War is going on. But in 1862, the Dakota people west of here ran into a situation where the crops weren't growing. They weren't getting the aid from the U.S. government like they had hoped to. And a situation happened where a handful of young Native American men killed some settlers. They had made a quick decision: do we turn them over to the government, or do we fight to protect our land? The quick decision was, let's fight to protect our land. The idea wasn't to kick the whites completely out of the state, but it was to save this territory that the Dakota considered home, or that was agreed to be given to them. Governor Ramsey is going to set up militias who are going to start fighting. So we're going to have a war here for 6 weeks in 1862. Federal troops will be sent in. Sibley will be sent in to bring in some of the troops. And there's some major battles. There's a brutality on all sides. It's an ugly mess of a war, even though it's only 6 weeks. When the war comes to an end, they want to punish the Native Americans who did this. So originally there were 303 that were sent that were going to be executed. And they had to send it off because they were military tribunals, and they sent these off to Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln reviewed it. It's a longer story, but there's a back and forth with all this. The number he goes back with, they look as too small, they said. They wanted a large number. They wanted to show that there's going to be a punishment for all this. And then on the final decision was on December 26th, 1862. Mankato becomes infamous because we have the largest mass execution with 38 Native Americans who were hung. The court cases were less than legal, a lot of kangaroo court situations and stuff like that. And then after that, the Native Americans are going to be sent to Fort Snelling and then just dispersed to other parts of the country. Jessica, what did I miss?
So, Jessica, how has the Blue Earth County Historical Society handled telling this story, this part of Minnesota history?
So it's this is a newer part of our museum. Our museum was designed in 1990, and we just updated all of these panels with some more modern language. And it was just really important that we're telling a more modern version of this. For us, we want to tell the facts of what happened. What you can find in the history book, but I'm going to look at Dr. Ward and say, well, that's always a question. But so we tell the facts of what happened over those 6 weeks. Also in Blue Earth County, the Ho-Chunk had a reservation in Blue Earth County. They are not recognized in the state of Minnesota of living here, yet they lived here for a significant amount of time, including in Blue Earth County. In 1863, there was a federal law that exiled the Dakota and the Ho-Chunk from the state of Minnesota. And so we want to make sure that we're telling the Dakota story about the execution, because that's the piece of the conflict that happened in Blue Earth County. The battles happened in Brown County and other counties, and that's their story to tell. So our story is what led up to the largest mass execution. But we also have space dedicated to telling the Ho-Chunk story, because their story does not get told at all. And so part of that is right now it's that complex but that simple, because it's our voice and not the Dakota and the Ho-Chunk voice. And so eventually we want to do an expansion with our whole museum and dedicate more space. But to do that, there needs to be more voices around the table telling more of this story and more of this history. And as historians that we are, we can only tell so much of it. And so it will be bigger and it will have more impact, but it can only be where it's at today because those other voices aren't around the table.
And for people who wonder, but what's the value of retelling something and drawing attention to something so tragic and so horrific and so sad?
Because it happens over and over and over again. And that's the reality.
It happened.
It happened, and it continues to happen. I think all four of us would say that's maybe the unfortunate lens that we have, is that we can see what's happening in the world today and go, oh gosh, haven't we already been here? Didn't we already do this? Didn't we learn from that?
Not if you don't know your history.
Not if you don't know your history. Exactly. And so that's why we exist. That's why we're here, is to help people understand that things have happened.
We often say at our museum that, most people think day to day or maybe a week down the line, whereas museums, we think in decades and centuries. And yeah, it's sometimes extremely frustrating for us to watch current events and go, again?
Yeah.
Didn't we do this last week or
250
whatever?
years ago?
Right. I mean, it is the one of those, cursed with knowledge sort of thing. So,
Professor Ward, I'm going to call on you again for another history lesson. You can feel free to charge me at the end of the program. Let's talk about the story behind the new Abraham Lincoln statue exhibit that just reopened at Minnesota State University, Mankato, because it's an example of how one institution grappled with a complex history. What do our listeners need to know about the Abraham Lincoln statue exhibit?
And you're right, the exhibit just opened up yesterday, officially opened at this point. So the background of the story is back in the 1920s. Some alumni got together, a graduating class, I believe, and bought a statue of Abraham Lincoln to have at Minnesota State University, Mankato. And it bounced around from place to place on campus. Finally, in the 1970s, found a home in the student union, and there it just kind of sat for the longest time. Which, going back to historiography, this is kind of a classic example. Same thing that happened with the story of 1862 with the Native Americans. 1862, the Native Americans, up until like the 1960s, 70s, were just the bad guys. They just did wrong, bad things and stuff like that. And the white settlers were all kind of innocent and stopped all this. Well, we have the Civil Rights Movement, and we also have the American Indian Movement that's going to come out of this. And one of the first things they do is they go to textbook companies and say, wait a minute, the way you're portraying this, the way you're portraying that needs to be changed. And so you start seeing in the 1980s, 1990s, a different change. And so on our campus, I'd say in the past 2 to 3 decades, there's been more conversation about okay, Abraham Lincoln represents really great things about the Civil War. African Americans saw him as, the man who freed the slaves. Longer story there too. But there's a whole conversation with that. But then Native Americans were like, Abraham Lincoln here in Mankato, that seems a little cringeworthy to have him there. So what I'm really proud of the university and the history department and some of my colleagues there, they did research, they had students do some work. There's now a situation where it's set aside in the library, and you get to hear different perspectives, different beliefs, different concepts, and different lenses of history.
But as an example, I mean, that's history. It's messy, it's complicated, it's this and it's that. Right?
Yeah.
And Mai, anything you would add to that about, that history can be messy and complicated, but we need to know it?
Yeah, absolutely. With the Hmong American experience, being part of the secret war in Laos, and being trained by the United States CIA, it became called the secret war because Americans didn't know about it, and that's that kind of violent piece of Hmong experience is really not told or shared, but it is part of the reason why we're here. So I'm glad to be here, right? Like, I'm grateful to be here. But it's also like that kind of, because of that war, that resulted in this kind of thing. And we're seeing refugees today that I'm seeing is a repetition of what my parents went through. It's the same kind of like U.S. is in these countries, and they are working with the local people there. And so, when we talk about history repeating itself, it's kind of this thing happening over and over again.
And Jessica, anything you want to add about the Abraham Lincoln statue and this new exhibit that now people can see, and just how we got to this point of like trying to decide like what's the best way to present the and?
I think I just have to say, I was at the opening yesterday and they did a beautiful job. They had multiple voices, doing the research, going through the text, really making sure that it was a well-rounded approach. And Dr. Corley, who's the director for the library, spoke yesterday and said, and we chose to put it in this spot because it's right next to the history section. So if you want to learn more, there are a lot of books that you can go learn more. And I thought that was just also a beautiful thing. But the exhibit is beautiful. The content is well-rounded. And it doesn't just say, hey, Abraham Lincoln was a president. It gives you so much more to understand about why it is a complex topic here in the state of Minnesota and in Mankato.
And Dave, any thoughts about what it's like to visit a museum and then maybe sit in discomfort? Like, I don't know if I really wanted to know that. I imagine. Like, right,
I've built exhibits all around making people uncomfortable.
Why is that a good thing?
I think it's a good thing because one of the things that historically has been a case, especially in some museums, is not necessarily rose-tinted glasses, but very particular perspectives, and causing people to be uncomfortable, not in a painful way, but in a way that makes them have to wrestle with the story they've always had. Introducing a piece that they maybe haven't had to that story that makes them rethink the whole thing is valuable from thinking about the story, but I think it also starts giving people permission to do that for other things, to always be questioning. We talk about what makes a good citizen, your ability to question whether that's true.
Yep.
I mean, I see it as growth.
Exactly.
Right? That we continue to learn and grow if you choose to.
Yep.
Right?
People are messy, right? As individuals, I mean, I'm a hot mess, I'm sure. So, our history is the same way. And so we need to be comfortable with that.
I want to spend our last few minutes together reflecting on the 250th anniversary of the United States of America, which will be marked on July 4th this year. I was just in D.C., lots of imagery, 250 years. Given all that we've talked about, I wonder if each of you, if you would just share with us what your institution is thinking about doing for that anniversary to mark it. And then if you could sort of fantasize, if you could design an exhibit for your area to commemorate it, and you had almost limitless money, what would you do to commemorate the 25th anniversary of the United States of America? Jessica?
It's a hard question, so I'm glad that we got it leaked to us because it is a hard question. I think in Minnesota, it's a really hard question because when you think about 250 years ago, Minnesota it's not part of the story. So initially, my mind went to, well, the exhibit needs to be about the indigenous people that lived here because it's their story that needs to be told. And then a friend of mine, we kept going back and forth, like, okay, what should I say? And then the other thing I think of is if we were going to do something, maybe it's more of that comparison about how 250 years ago, how it compares to what life is like today. I think when you look back that far, if you think about being a middle schooler and you're like 250 years, that's forever. If you could wrap your head around like, well, who were those people? What was their life like? How is it similar to how my life is like today? What are they grappling with that we're grappling with today? I mean, it kind of goes back to my kindergarten tours where I would say then and now. I think maybe it's a simplistic way to think about it, but maybe that's what we need to really have a handle of what has changed, but what hasn't. So it's a hard question, but I think that is maybe my answer. And for us as an organization, we are hoping to partner with a few different things that are happening within the community in July to just be part of elevating the Historical Society, but also elevating that if you want to learn more about history, there are places and resources in our community where you can learn more. We won't necessarily be able to teach you about 1776, but we can help you understand where this fits into the story of the United States.
And Dave, what about the Rice County Historical Society? What would be a dream exhibit for 250 years to celebrate the United States?
To Jessica's point, right, we don't necessarily have a direct tie to 1776. And the more that I've thought about this question, I hit on an exhibit that would probably get me in a lot of trouble, like everything I do.
Oh, do tell.
So I would love to do an exhibit on the promise we made versus the promise we kept, and looking at our founding documents of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, and what did we say we would be as a nation 250 years from then versus the nation we are today. I think it's President Obama who had said, America is an unfinished story. So what are the pieces of us that we have yet to live up to our ideal? And not just where have we fallen short, but the question we should always ask is what is then the next step to get us there?
We're dreaming now. What would be, do you think, a fitting, a memorable exhibit to commemorate America's 250th anniversary?
Yeah, I think about that time period worldwide, the geopolitical world, and how colonialism at that time affected the Hmong people who were living in China at that time and being persecuted because of, the global politics, and how the Hmong people's spirit has always been to be independent, to be able to practice the practices that we want to practice, be who we are, and then migrating south into Southeast Asia, and then in the last 50 years into coming to the United States, and how just kind of thinking about it a little bit bigger, because America's history doesn't happen in a bubble, right? It happens globally. It's interacting with all of the histories around the world, and it affected, the Hmong community from 200 years ago. And I like to share with people that the Hmong people have not had peaceful time until very recently. So for 200 years, the Hmong people have been a persecuted community and just trying to escape. And it is all the result of, that kind of globalism and colonialism of that time period. So, I mean, if we had limitless money, I would love to interview all of the elders and get their experiences from, that time period, and share with us about the migration of their parents and grandparents, so that we can get a fuller story.
And Professor Ward, my gift to you, you get to pretend now to be a museum director or a historical society leader. What do you think would be something that would be fitting and really educational?
Do I get all the rights and privileges of being a museum director?
Everything.
Let us know what
do
those
everything.
are.
If you could, what would you create?
So I'll put my historiography hat back on here. And 250 years ago, the U.S. The Declaration of Independence was signed. And my thought is it'd be interesting to see the global impact that that's had in the past 250 years. You can see the Declaration of Independence show up in other political revolutions, social revolutions around the world. Sometimes they basically copy the same thing using phrases and stuff like that. Doing some programming, bringing in some experts from all these different countries to say what has been the impact, what's been the positive impacts, the negative impacts in the past 250 years.
Good job. Good. All right. Well, this has been a fantastic discussion. Thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you to our audience. I love having you all here with us, hearing from you. Once again, we've been talking with Jessica Potter, the Executive Director of the Blue Earth County Historical Society, Dave Nichols, Executive Director of the Rice County Historical Society, Mai Vang Huzel, Founder and Director of the Hmong Museum in St. Paul, and finally, Professor Kyle Ward, who directs the Social Studies Education Program at Minnesota State University, Mankato. And many thanks to our wonderful live audience members again here in Mankato at the Mayo Clinic Health System Event Center. Special thanks to the Minnesota Alliance for Local History Museums for letting us join their annual conference. I'm Angela Davis. Until next time, be well, everyone. Thanks for listening.